So welcome back, Dave. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Yeah, this is nice, connecting this way. I'm very much enjoying our conversation. So I just wanted to really pick up from our last conversation, because we were getting quite juicy around the subject of trauma. And I was, when I listened back again, I just wanted to get your take on trauma and developmental trauma and attachment trauma. So I know there's a lot that we can rewire. And I know in the law of attraction, that sort of thing, we're often working towards rewiring ourselves so that we can let in that which we want. With trauma, though, I'm wondering how, in my research into trauma, there's this age range from the womb to age 2, which it's very fundamental for a human. If somebody has been denied secure attachment persistently and consistently in that time, can this be rewired, or is it too fundamental to the being? What's your take on that, Dave?
I think it can, but it takes time. And it's not one of these quick fix things that the law of attraction tends to feed on. You know, I think that's what the tension point is between people with integrity who understand the deeper machinations of the human psyche, and how people with genuine needs of reprogramming and repatterning their core trauma issues tend to go for the quick fix through the law of attraction type philosophies, which don't appreciate that, yes, you might manifest something new, but it'll come with all the old sticky patterns, because you're working at a level that is much deeper than what you recognize, because it was literally imbued or franked or kind of stamped or tattooed into you at such a deep level. And my understanding is that comes into the brainstem. It's the core. There's 3 parts to the brain, and age 0 to 2, that level of development is in the actual stem of the brain, which is the hardest to access, and it's beyond emotion. So no amount of emotional catharting, sitting around in New Age circles, crying to your psychotherapist, it can, and verbals don't tend to get it. However, frequencies do. And those frequencies, if they're traveling in delta waves, if someone's voice is carrying delta wave patterns, then yes, listening to someone with a very soothing voice that lulls your system into and your brain into delta wave repatterning, that can then help to uplift and uproot and reveal these kind of distorted patterns of attachment, these ways that we misconstrue reality based on the overlays of trauma that literally act like a webbing, and then we don't see reality, we see what we want to see. So one example was, I was driving with somebody to a city nearby here, and it had just gone from dusk, evening, where we had light, and then we had no light. And this person I was taking a lift with hadn't put their lights on. So people were trying to stop the car at traffic lights, banged on his bonnet, shouting at him. Other drivers were like beeping at him. But he has a persecution complex. So I was looking at the situation. He's going, see, I told you, people seem to attack me, and astrologically, it's a really bad week for me. Look, now you can see it. Now it's not just me talking about it. And I said, yeah, but I'm noticing how triggered you are around this. To me, it's like something's going on here. I said, are your lights on? Because I can't see them shining off the other cars or the walls. And he goes, oh. And he put them on halfway. So he put them on light side beams. And so people were still shouting. And he goes, see, it's nothing to do with the lights. So I said, actually, I don't think your lights are fully on. About 5 minutes later, I said, I still can't see them reflecting. And so his reality is so cemented into that belief system and that dynamic of being attacked. and being on defense, that it was like a really interesting explosion of his reality, because I just wouldn't buy into it. And I think that's an example of when you've got trauma, you're wearing these kind of these lenses that make you see a certain reality. Whereas another person who's not traumatized in that core place, 0 to 2, will not perceive reality like that.
Yeah.
And it literally can be as simple as turning on the lights.
Yeah.
But to do that, that takes some repatterning. And that's why mindfulness programs can begin to put you in that delta wave. And those are the frequencies of deep states of relaxation. Beyond theta, there's like theta healing. And again, that doesn't reach these places. These healing modalities, these new age modalities, tend to have a limit. And there's very few things out there that enable someone to actually clear these brainstem patterns. So it's a very difficult area to sort of work with.
And how do you access these delta waves, or how do you, what can you use to bring about these delta waves? So mindfulness meditation?
Yeah, I mean, there's various modalities out there. I personally have worked with an embodiment practice that combines mindfulness with embodiment, with attuning to the frequencies of the earth and bringing the three together. And that's what I've pioneered in my work. And I've worked with a teacher who also trains people in that frequency, so that it's something that he experienced in his a near-death experience. So when you have a near-death experience, you can reach those states of at the core frequency of creation. So it's like going back into the patterning of creation, so that your mind literally has to release, your brain has to release the patterning that you've taken on. And as that unravels and you see the patterns that you're running in those really deep nuances. Another example, if that's appropriate, would be somebody who keeps attracting narcissists in their relationships. I was working with a client like this, and then they did a load of law of attraction manifestation stuff for a new partner. Within a day, they'd been contacted by somebody, thought it was great, fell into it because it seemed great.
Yeah.
It turns out this other person is smothering them in codependency. If you've got a wounding there of abandonment and these attachment traumas, you can see the duality between unworthiness and narcissism on one extreme of the kind of the sine wave of reality, or the duality of reality, of manifesting. And then you can see the codependent smothering on the other side, because those are both adjustments to not being present and whole within yourself, because that secure attachment that your parents probably, very few parents will probably have that secure self-attachment. You're just absorbing that parental patterning, plus what their level of presence was towards you and in themselves in those first few years. So you can see how people oscillate between dualities as they're learning about themselves and their relationships. Many people would say, oh yeah, I had the most awful asshole in one relationship, and then the most, almost smothering, over-loving partner in my next. It's quite common until you learn to then find yourself in the middle.
Yes. Interesting.
Is that making sense?
It's totally making sense. And I think there's a whole dynamic with narcissism and empaths, isn't there? That's often talked about. So there's the sort of two jigsaw puzzles seem to click in.
Narcissists and empaths are two sides of the same coin.
Yes, opposites almost, you mean?
If you think of that kind of polarity, on one side of the polarity you've got the empath, on the other side of the polarity you've got the narcissist.
Yes.
And they go hand in glove.
Yes. Yeah, okay, so that's great. I just wanted to jump to that place of you mentioned the law of attraction, and actually these superficial new age remedies for these sorts of things. What do you make of the spiritual materialism that seems to be awash everywhere on our news feeds? The short aphorisms telling you to just vibrate such and such and this will come back. What do you think of that?
Well, if you think of these core imprint deficits, like we were talking about, if you haven't got the attachment, security, there's been traumas in your upbringing, then you're not going to be able to truly be present and relaxed in yourself and feel that completion of relationship without another soothing you or meeting your needs on a quite a chronic level. So then the chronic adjustments, then you make adjustments, and those adjustments become part of your character. So people tend to then keep making adjustments outside of themselves in relationships, to material goods, to career, success, fitness, you name it, because it sustains them.
Yes.
But they never address the core wounding. And so, as we were saying before, the law of attraction can be very seductive because it's offering a solution, saying, almost like the Holy Grail, it's like we can finally help you with this discomfort that you feel inside that we can't quite figure out.
Yeah.
And here's a nice, easy solution. Give me $5,000. I'll show you how to basically make yourself happy, because you can attract anything you want. And that will give you happiness. And we all know that, that to a point, it's good to have material comfort. It's good to have a partner in your life. It's good to have career progression. It's good to have objects of desire. But it's like chasing the ace. They always leave you unfulfilled if you're patterning underneath it, as we've discussed, is attracts the deficits around the objects and the people, because fundamentally you're not feeling whole and complete in yourself. And the manifesting isn't coming from that place first, of relaxing in those delta waves, relaxing in that very deep place of presence, and then allowing the creations to come from there. And so they're coming inside out rather than outside in.
Yes, it's like a series of sticking plasters that might sort of work for a while or satisfy something in the shorter term, but perhaps, yes, I get a sense that they are sticking plasters with a whole sort of septic wound underneath, really.
And that's nobody's fault. That's the way the brain manages trauma. It makes an adjustment to a trauma or a lack of deficit in parenting, and it creates a coping mechanism. That coping mechanism then webs more coping mechanisms on top of it. And so you just build these layers of coping on top of the original trauma. So you've got all this kind of density that starts to compact into the musculature of the body, the psyche, and it splits off into other dimensions. So then that's when you need more shamanic and soul retrieval work. So there's all these ways,
I was just that jumped into my mind. The ayahuasca and the medicine plant way is perhaps one way of reaching out. I don't know, I have no experience of it personally, but it strikes me as possibly one way to clear that stuff that's deep underneath. It's interesting in obviously, as you know, I teach yoga, and often in yoga I'll have students will bring emotion will come up, and I often think that perhaps by twisting and moving and breathing, we're just, like you said, that stuff is in our tissues. And so we're moving it through by bringing the prana through the breath and twisting and moving where we wouldn't normally twist and move through our habits. And it was interesting. She said to me, "Oh, is this a good thing? Is this a good thing?" And I said, "Well, it's neither good nor bad. It's just that you've got a reaction." And interestingly, she said after the emotion came up, she got incredibly hungry. And I said, "Well, by any chance, are you a comfort eater?" And she said, "Yes, I am." And that was just really interesting. She was quite struck by that juxtaposition. It just was there to show her.
Yeah, wow. And people's emotions are miscalibrated because of that. It's like our emotions are being triggered by our core patterns, but our core patterns are aligned to our true state of equilibrium. So a degree of then noticing, oh, I've got really hungry, and noticing, wow, what's my true need here? Is it actually food, or is it an adjustment to something where I'm just feeling a hunger for love, or a hunger for affection, or a hunger for some rest or
Yes,
water? You know,
or
what is
a
that?
hit of something just to not have to deal with that, the intensity of the emotion that came up.
There's that, and potentially also, I've noticed when people get into their bodies, they do become more hungry. You know, when you drop in, you know, when you've been very avoidant and your psyche is literally split off and you're kind of floating just outside your body, because to be in your body is to touch that trauma as they come in and do the yoga, which is a great modality to experience the trauma, move it, and the body starts making noises and you start crying or burping, and then as you come in and that trauma kind of pops out, then you're in. And you feel more in touch with your animalistic drives, such as your sex drive, your hunger, and it, you know, as you get past the trauma of just being in your body, it can make you hungry as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When I was, you know, I came to yoga when I had a massive breakdown through my divorce, and it was horrendously acrimonious and very vengeful a process. And I couldn't eat. I literally couldn't eat. I went down to 7 stones. I mean, I'm like 8.5 now. That's my normal weight, always has been 8.5. 7 stones. I just could not eat. But curiously, what I find so interesting about that time was that everybody said how great I looked. So I was so out of my body. I was in a major amount of trauma, like suicidal. But everybody kept saying how great I looked. And I thought, wow, that's so interesting. What's going on there in our society that we want to detach people from their bodies? We want to disassociate, and this is a good thing. It's a good look.
Well, that's what trauma does. Is that if you imagine there's 3 senses, you look better when you're traumatized and, you know, starving yourself. If you think of those 3 senses of the brain, the heart, and the sex, they come together in kind of in union for intimacy. And when you've received a trauma, you withdraw possibly from the sex and the heart into kind of just the mind, and then maybe even float outside the mind, outside the body, and then you just can't really, you know, you haven't got clear thinking. And then the trauma can stay in your emotional system, like you said, sort of feeling suicidal. And it's really distressing because you don't have the support of your breath. You don't have the support of grounding and feeling the earth and connecting to the earth and grounding the distress through you into the earth and letting it fall away. So you lose all these resources. You don't have your sexuality to cleanse yourself, like a woman's period every month. She can then drop those emotions through her womb and her blood, and in that kind of the way that women's emotions work, very you know, profound attunement to their periods and their shedding.
Yes.
So you lose those resources when you don't bring, you know, the trauma of the separation and the divorce, and then, like I said, some of the acrimony and the vengeful behavior we're dealing with. Those can sort of shock your system, and then leave you with loops of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and suicidal thoughts, because we're literally in that flight from our humanity. We're literally in abandonment. We can't be there to hold our own essence of ourself in our body, and it's deeply distressing to be in that state. And yet, like you say, in that state, if you're not eating, you drop weight, and then you can look really trim and sort of, you know, defined in your features, which society favors. It's crazy, isn't it?
It is crazy. It was a very crazy time. Yeah, a very crazy time. So I think I'm still working through some of it, and that was 10 years ago, but thank goodness for yoga. It's a lifesaver. Yeah. Okay. So the new age marketplace. What do you make of that? There's a solution for everything. There's a quick fix for everything.
think,
I mean, just to qualify that question,
yeah,
and more what's dropping in for me is that this is a process, and it's really about accepting what is. Because I have, like so many of us, run a program about, well, if I get that sorted and it's all in the future. And actually sometimes it's really just about being present in the moment, perhaps. Which it's not a money generator, is it?
it's very difficult to say because it's very personal. Everyone's different and everyone has a personal experience. So I can only talk for myself.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of good stuff that's out there. But I think there's some flaws and some misperceptions that dog the new age, which we can focus in on from our personal experience and what we observe. You know, I've been around it 20, 30 years. In terms of misperceptions of the new age, there's a difference between awakening and spirituality's understanding of awakening. So awakening is a stripping down of every single thing you think you know about yourself. It's a shedding of every single belief, perception, and expression of identity.
Yeah.
And the true awakening path, or if you want to call it enlightenment, you know, one of the best resources for that is Adyashanti, because he is the expert in enduring awakenings. Not an awakening where you have a boost, you think you've got it all, and you set up your teaching and you go off and you teach people. That is often, for many people, just the beginning of a true enduring awakening. And yet the initial hit, that nuclear charge of a connection and a reconnection to source, is not the end point. Like you say, it's a progression, and there are many levels to that. So yes, you might have your initial connection to source, and you might have shed something huge, and you might be able to see other people and all their stuff and support them. But for myself, and I'll speak for myself, that was just the beginning of actually shedding deeper and deeper distortions and deeper, you know, traumas in my brainstem and in my ancestral line, and ancestral attachments in other realms that were stuck to me, and fragments of me that had gone off that weren't addressed through that awakening, which was powerful and put me in a position of empowerment and power above other people who were not so connected to source and didn't have an understanding of what it was to be in that delta state. But it's deepening those deep relaxed states, those slow brainwave states, into yourself every day, particularly when you're triggered, particularly when you're noticing patterns are coming up, where you leave yourself, where you abandon yourself, where you're not aware of yourself. That's the time to bring everything through. And I think there's a tremendous desire for people to soothe themselves instead of actually going deeper and pushing through the pain and clearing the things out. Instead of clearing things out, people soothe things by putting things on top of what's hurting and deeply embedded inside. Yes. So my experience of the New Age is it creates get-arounds and soothers that mean that they you kind of do a little bit of catharsis and a little bit of clearing and a little bit of addressing things, and you can cope really well. And then you feel the boost of this new modality you're practicing, or this new yoga, or this, that, and the other. But you're not pulling things out by the roots. You're kind of numbing yourself with a new medicine. Even if it's New Age medicine, not kind of, you know, chemical, whatever, from the medical, you know, pharmaceuticals. And so my honest experience is when I sit down with people and I open up their field, is that we have to remove a lot of their New Age modalities from their field, which have compacted down the core trauma and made it manageable, made them able to cope.
Yes.
But at some point down the line, that has to come out, because those issues have to be addressed. And that's my personal experience of it.
Yes, I'm definitely in that space. I mean, I've been practicing and teaching yoga for 7 years, pretty much daily, as a very committed full-time practice. And I think it's very common. I've reached a bit of a plateau. I'm feeling like I've reached a plateau. I'm feeling like I'm ready to go a bit deeper, and sort of banging my head because it's a glass floor. But, you know, that's part of it, I guess. So yes, interesting, and we'll talk later about that, maybe. Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah, that's when people, just to address that, that's when I think that's when people realize, hang on a minute, this new age thing isn't working for me, and they want to then go, well, what is there that's deeper than this? And that's the time, if when it's a really good opportunity to look, and that's when people come to me when they've tried everything else. They've tried psychotherapy, they've tried new age stuff, and that's when I tend to work with someone. And there was a period of undoing, and then there's a period of clearing things out, and then there's a period of them just coming into themselves, empty, and just being able to sit with that presence. And that's when they start to see their life and their patterns in new technical colorways that gives them the impetus to start making changes.
So tell me more about how you do work with people in a practical way. Do you work? Yeah.
Well, I think what I've realized now, and it's really important that I'm able to express this, is I'm working at the quantum level, which is a big word for saying in your blueprint. So it's like the very essence of who you are, where even your higher self has picked up misprograms, like sort of fault lines, which need to be cleared out of your higher self, because then your higher self just comes down and recreates them. So even if you are tuning into your higher self, there's the blueprint that sits above the higher self. And then I use my Gestalt psychotherapy training. I use the mindfulness, the breath work, the embodiment, my shamanic training. I use all these tools, some of the tantric breathing. I've done like the hands-on, learning how to use your own hands on your body, and all these different mechanisms to raise your awareness of what actually is coming out your body while you're speaking about your problem. Where is it located? And then what then tends to happen is we can pull it out at the root in the body, whilst also tuning into the sort of template, the blueprint at the same time. So I'm working in unison, in partnership with the client, to literally galvanize their presence to come in and around them, their higher self, to clear the sort of the areas where there's trauma compacted, where there's misperceptions wedged in, where there's ancestral cords or cords to ex-lovers or whoever it is that are kind of misconstruing them, kind of misrepresenting, mismanifesting them if it's coming from the blueprint.
Yes.
Because you're not fully bringing yourself in, or if someone's deeply traumatized and a part of themselves is split off in another dimension, that will start to show up when we sit in the delta waves that I bring through in the quiet. They start to feel parts of themselves aren't there, that they weren't aware weren't there when we weren't sat in that kind of present-centered state whilst talking about the issue, and then we go quiet. So that's how I do it. It's kind of like pioneering a new way of bringing together established modalities, but under the umbrella of accessing the quantum.
And do you do this on like Zoom as we're doing, or Skype, or do you do face-to-face?
Yeah, it makes no difference for the most part.
Right.
Occasionally there's something in someone's aura that literally manually I can pull out, because it literally starts to show itself as a physical thing to me, and I literally just go like this and pull it out. But that's very rare these days, because I can do most of it is you can open up your field anywhere on the planet in relation to me, because we're working with empowering the person to feel their own body in their own field. And that ignites the process. It's a self-empowerment process. So it's not like I've got all the answers. All I'm doing is using my practice. So I've been doing this approach 5 to 6 hours a day, every day for the last 3 years myself. So it means that my physical body and my personal aura is very defined. So it means I'm fully present in it.
Yes.
When my field meets another person's field, it pushes on all the areas where they're not present in theirs. And it kind of creates a mastermind between the two of us of pushing up to the surface and making them accountable to come into all the places where they're not fully in, and they're not incongruent, and they're not in equilibrium, and they're not in well-being. Those will have to come out of them. So people can get quite sick, as sickness that's buried down literally surges up from where it's buried and covered up with healing modalities, I hate to say.
Yes.
It comes out, they go, oh, but I've healed that already. And I'm like, no, you put something over it and made it feel nice and soothed it and numbed it out.
Mm.
So all sorts of strange things come out of people when I work with them, and they can have a healing crisis for a few days after a session. It doesn't necessarily soothe them immediately. And then once that's cleared out, they're like, oh my God, I'm so glad I stuck with the process and pursued the embodiments, because it's now come full circle and cleared it all out, which goes almost ironically in juxtaposition to the most of the new age, which is like, oh wow, you know, in one session I cleared all my aura out and I feel wonderful. And I was like, oh, I want that too. And like, you know, so it creates the kind of me too, I want that. Oh, law of attraction, yeah. Oh, that's $500, thank you. Oh wow, I've cleared everything out in, you know, one session. I'm like, yeah, I could move, perhaps if there's a dead relative hanging around someone's field, you know, we can clear that out and they will feel a huge shift. And that could make a huge difference, because then that's two bodies, two souls living off one power pack, one body. So yeah, it's almost like low-hanging fruit to me. That's just almost a given that's going to be. Whereas people can misconstrue just something simple like that to making these deeper patterned change. It depends what people want, you know, how deep they want to go, whether they, you know, there's just something that they just want to address, that it's moving on an ancestor, or perhaps their mum lost a child, and that baby through a miscarriage or an abortion has stayed around, the brightest light in the family. It just came and it stayed there. And then there's sort of these distorted voices that go through people's minds, and it's just an ancestor or someone who's passed away, who's just nestling in the light of someone's soul. So these are the sorts of things that can be hanging around people that to me are just a low-hanging fruit.
Yes.
That just a lot of people, you know, charge a huge amount of money just to clear those. When actually,
God, I mean, I've been to people who just, it's a joke sometimes. They'll wave their hands around and say, well, that's all clear now, off you go. And I just think, how do they get away with it, these people? There's so much belief invested because people want to heal. They really want to heal. So one thing I wanted to ask you, it's been sort of, I haven't planned this really, it's just been bubbling in my consciousness. There's a lot of, in the spiritual movement or in the personal development sphere, people talk about going through resistances and blocks. So for example, there's a big thing about cold swimming. We're going to do lots of breathing. We're going to get into ice baths, and that sort of thing fills me with horror, really. And I don't know why it fills me with horror. Probably because when I was younger, I was so disassociated. I did all sorts of things like that, I think. I might be wrong, I don't know. But I was very gung-ho. I'd go into the most dangerous situation, the most extreme things, and do them. Sweat lodges, you know, turn it up. And I'm not going to go even though I'm feeling like I'm going to have a heart attack. That kind of thing. What do you think? Because there is a shamanic tradition of pushing boundaries and going to the edge. What's your opinion on that? Because I've been scratching my head on this one.
It's horses for courses again. It's very individual. I think you can look at swimming in, you know, icy waters, holding your breath, you know, Wim Hof method, all that.
Yeah. I
see these things as apps on an iPhone or on a cell phone, an Android. It's like an app.
Yes.
Put an app onto your phone, but if the operating system under the app is carrying some bugs, the app ain't going to work. The app isn't going to change your life. So if your core programming is fine and you do the Wim Hof method and you go swimming icy in the sea, you can get amazing well-being from that. You know, and there's a sense of embodiment to some extent. So it's going to be good for you in any event. But if you're still running those core programs, going swimming in ice cold water isn't going to address the core bugs in your nervous system, in your decision making, in your discernment, because of these core trauma patterns. It isn't going to address those things. It's going to make you strong. It might improve your cardiovascular. It could give you all these benefits, but it isn't the solve-all to everything. In the same way, ayahuasca isn't. Ayahuasca, after a purge, gives you this tremendous uplift. And then that's when people go around going, it's the most amazing thing ever. What you don't see is the people taking ayahuasca on the come down. And if they've got ancestral baggage that hasn't been pulled away during the ayahuasca trip, it acts as actually a counterweight that drags them down even deeper than where they were before the initial ayahuasca session. So what do? They go and have another ayahuasca journey to try and then they get on a loop of taking ayahuasca, and taking cambo, and taking, you know, the other bark medicine. They go on a whole journey, becoming more and more of an experienced drug addict, taking all these medicines, getting more and more. It's a bit like when a fly is stuck in a web and it starts to fight, the web wraps around it and it gets more and more entangled.
Yes, yes. I'm beginning to think that the new modalities now, you mentioned quantum, it's very interesting. I'm wondering if our nervous system is key to this. I think there's a lot of new modalities coming from America, something called DARE, and there's another one I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's about repatterning the nervous system. Do you think this is getting more to the core of our stuff?
I do, because I think if you think about repatterning the brain with these slower brain waves that are more aligned to pure source, you're working with pure source, then they have an effect on the vagus nerve, because the brain goes to the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve goes through the whole entire nervous system and most of the organs. And once that starts to relax and release, it releases all these patterns held in the fascia, held in the organs, and then they come up to the surface. So you need to then use your logic, use your mind constructively, use your awareness well, where a lot of these sort of Vedic devotional ways are all about giving up any mind and just merging with the one. Just be one. And the problem with merging with the one, there's no problem with merging with the one at all. That's what we're all trying to do. We're all trying to get back to our union with source. We're all trying to come back to wholeness and that sense where we came from when we were a baby. But babies are born into their bodies undifferentiated. Our job is to differentiate and fully embody. And then from that place of discernment, source comes into us and merges with us in a healthy, bounded way. But if you are denying your sovereignty, you're denying your individuation process, and then you try and merge with source like a baby, you bring into yourself all sorts of crap. And you take on the karma of whatever you're merging with.
That's so interesting, isn't it? So in a way, what you're suggesting is using these more quantum and frequency-based healing modalities, and then refining your physical systems, refining your mind. Yeah.
And then once you've got that foundation and you've cleared out your patterns, your ancestral stuff, your trauma, your misperceptions, your relationship, way of doing relationship, your way of making money, once that's sort of, you've got a grip on what you do and what's inside you and what you're running, then putting these other things on, like apps on a phone, will work bloody brilliantly. There's nothing wrong with them. They're just not the foundational pieces that becomes so part of the marketing and the whole, hoopla of the new age. It's become like an industry where everyone's trying to sell their way is the way. And I guess I'm the same. I feel that this way of working, of creating a foundation, is essential in order to benefit from all these amazing new age modalities, but they don't tap into the depth and they don't clear out the depth that when you initiate source to come through you and in you and access, what it does is it starts to pull stuff out of you. And I do not see that happening in the majority of modalities. Even ayahuasca, I don't see it being done in a pure way like that.
Well, I intuit from those repeated users is I just see a bit of there's something not quite, that doesn't quite sit right with me. It's a club, and it's a club of a certain, like you say, there's an architecture that's not quite dealing with the bottom there's an architecture of being, if you like, and
I feel it blows the brain circuits, not in all cases, but in people who seem to repeatedly use it over a long-term period of time. It seems to blow the brain circuits, so you're not in connection with your trauma, so you can't feel it. But as someone who comes into contact with someone like that, I still experience it in their field.
Yes. There's perhaps an element of the spiritual bypass we've spoken of before.
Yeah.
And I think with a lot of our traumas right now, right here and now, for the Western people, let's say, where we've got the time and space to look at them now. We're more wealthy and healthy than we've ever been. We're not scrabbling for livings and scraping in the dust, and so we've got the space to do this. And I think it says in the Bible, straight is the gate. It's not easy, is it? It's a very narrow. The road is pockmarked with lots of rabbit holes, really, isn't it?
It's like there's 100,000 ways to journey, and there's probably 3 that work.
Yes.
And if you look at some of these tribes in the Amazon, and you look at some of these countries that have very low wages before they hit a level of development, the people in the tribes in the jungle, the 85, 80-year-old men have the bodies of teenagers, and there's no disease, they have all their teeth, and they're happy. And then these cultures before capitalism, they might be earning like £3,000 a year, and they're happy, they don't want for anything, and they're at one with themselves, and they're in tune with nature, and they live very humbly, but they seem to be the most ecstatic people on the planet. And there's less and less of those cultures. But in that trend, it's because they haven't hit the capitalistic upturn, where suddenly the shame of, we talked about those shame showers in the culture, start to sort of permeate through them and start to give them desire. And then the cost of living and resources start to creep up on them as their country, starts to put them into debt. And so what we're talking about with these two, what's common to those two themes, is that people are working with the frequencies of nature, which is source. They're very in their bodies, and they live by traditional parenting methods that have been passed down from generation to generation to generation, and they perhaps don't have the trauma and the wars that have created developed countries.
Yes. So, but we do, and we can't go back to those places. So I guess we are it's being asked of us to upgrade, evolutionary upgrade, so that we can meet the world of. When I was sat in a meeting this morning, I tried to get on the Wi-Fi. There was a list that long on my phone of all the Wi-Fi things around me. I thought, no wonder I'm feeling half cooked. It's we're being denatured at every single point, really. So we can't get back to the jungle. I would love to live under a banyan tree barefoot. I really would.
But you can, if your practice is your breath, your body, attuning to the frequencies of nature, which are pure source, both of the earth and the heavenly aspects of source. Yes. And what starts to happen is that if you start to focus on your skin every day and just feel the skin on the tip of your nose, if you just tune in and close your eyes, breathe in and count your breath into the count of 5, and then breathe out through your mouth again for the count of 5. And as you're breathing like that, instead of floating away, feel the skin in between your fingers. And then breathing, maintaining this breathing rhythm, feeling your skin in between your toes. And then just noticing the weight. Where's the weight attributed in your body? Where's heavy? Where's tense? Where's comfortable? As you maintain control of your breath. And then noticing, I can hear the bird song outside. So whoever's watching this, just listening to what's in their environment. And noticing What noise is going on in your head as I'm speaking? Just feeling the furniture that you might be sat on. Do you notice, can you remember the colour of it in your mind? How near to the walls can you sense yourself? And as you begin to fully embody and take charge of your breath, you are entering into your sovereign state. Because if you can maintain discipline of your breath, even during the biggest trigger, and notice your skin and feel your environment, what starts to happen is whatever's running you shows up. And as you hold this position of equanimity, it starts to push it out. It starts to ignite this process of showing you what's inside you and what runs you.
Yes.
And the more you practice this, the stronger the core becomes. And then things like Wi-Fi can't penetrate you. Literally, it creates, because then what starts to happen is you start to differentiate what you are on the inside that's not feeling like you in your pure essence of goodness.
Yes.
And that starts to clear out. And as you then backfill that with nature's frequencies, with purity, with breath, with the earth, being out in nature, yoga, good yoga, whatever it is, good food, you start to change your habits, like bad eating habits, addictions start to drop away, because they're just following these trauma patterns, these ancestral patterns, these ancestral attachments. They all start to drop away, and what starts to come in is goodness. And that's the natural law of attraction. Because if you're here, fully in your body, fully present, not running all these distorted patterns, goodness can find you, because it's all around you, because it's the law of nature. Nature is by definition abundant. So in the right season, your abundance will come to you.
Yeah. It's interesting, in Yogi Bhajan talks about circumvent force. So we work with our magnetic field, and we work with harnessing the glandular and the nervous systems to create this circumvent force, so that, and I often feel it after I've practiced, or if I haven't practiced, actually is when I feel it. I feel that I shrink and I become, it's coming in at me, and it's like, oh, you know, and but then if I'm consistent in my practice, I feel that. And actually quite recently it's been shrinking a bit, because I've been very much in my head, and old patterns have just been coming up, so I felt that shrinkingness. So that's a great reminder, actually, and just doing those 2 minutes has just put me back into that place of, yeah, because I'm a very mental person, so often when I meditate I'll get lots of downloads, and so I've just started using my meditations as a creative source, and it's like, no.
And also, yesterday was the equinox. It was a full moon, it was a super moon, and the equinox. So it's unsurprising if, like, you know, it's like a high surge of spirit tide, and that lifts up all the sediment and brings a huge influx of new spring energies.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. Yes.
Yeah.
And
so yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly, on that note, you know my daughter. So she's got a condition called cystic fibrosis, and I remember contacting before internet this guy who overcame his cystic fibrosis through Qigong, the practices of Qigong. He literally had to sit underneath a mountain and wait for this master who kept poo-pooing him, telling him to go back to America, and he didn't want to see him, go away. But he stuck it out, and he went and got this technique studied with him. I mean, it's a classic story, it's a fairy tale story, really. But basically, I contacted him because I used to notice that my daughter would get sick around equinoxes and solstices. She would get poorly. And he said, oh yes, he said, your chi is in such a state of flux, and you just need to build it up at those times. He says, I know when it's equinox and solstices and the cross-quarter holidays. He says, it's just in my body. I mean, how interesting is that? It's a real validation.
Yeah, and there's a massive movement in the tectonic plates of the planet. Energetically, when you think about the atrocity in New Zealand and the mosques, the waves of rage and indignation in the Muslim community and Islam community, and the fear of being attacked, and the new budget announcement in the UK for protection of religious places of worship, particularly mosques. They've received a budget to help them protect themselves.
Right.
And the amount of movement in the collective energy around this is huge, and it's moving us towards realizing that the amount of hate in religion has to shift.
Yes.
And in a way, that disaster might shed some light on people perhaps rethinking their perspectives on how can my religion, far right extremism, for Muslim extremism with the terrorist bombers on both sides. What people will, I'm sure it's going to create a huge amount of soul searching, because both sides now have their extremists.
Yes, and we're shifting from the age of Pisces, I believe, to the age of Aquarius. I know, experience versus being told, being directed which way to go, and we're on that cusp.
Exactly, and if you think what we've talked about in the last 40 minutes is basically whatever's dark and destructive and hidden has to surface. It sucks like hell when it comes out, and then as it comes out, it releases. It causes all sorts of chaos and catastrophe as it comes out, and then once it's out, then there is perhaps a peace and a breath that can take place. And the planet is trying to help us, humanity, to purge these places of hatred and racism and bigamy and bigotry and all sorts of stuff. It's trying to get it all out. And it will hurt like hell as it comes out.
It's the shadow work, isn't it? It's interesting. I saw one of those threads, and a group of Maoris did a haka to support, and they were doing all their haka things. And somebody writes, "Oh yeah, but the Maoris weren't much better, were they? They took slaves and they did this." And it's just like, wow. It's like, we've all got the shadow. It doesn't belong to one group and not to another group. We are all working out this shadow stuff. If only we would have the courage to just say, I've got a foul shadow. Is it as foul as yours? Yes. Oh, yeah, we've all got a foul shadow, It's part of the contrast of being on the planet.
Yeah.
So I reckon we should close it on that one. Conversation. I swear at the time.
It's coming into the light.
Let's bring it to the light. Let's visualizing it. A lovely dark seed in the white flesh of a beautiful Sharon fruit or something. Is it white? Okay, thanks, Dave. It's been really nice to talk to you.
It's been a pleasure. It's been really good.
Yeah, we'll do it again. We've got more to talk about. So I'm going to disconnect, but I just want to say another